The snow along County Route 6 looked like someone had shaken powdered sugar over a jagged old table. Caleb Ross eased his truck to a crawl, headlights cutting through the pine-scented dusk. He knew this road like the back of his hand. Knew its blind turns, its crumbling shoulders, and the way the silence out here wasn't just quiet, it was loaded. He hadn't planned to stop, but something on the side of the road pulled at him. At first it looked like debris, maybe a fallen log or roadkill. Then it twitched. He hit the brakes. Caleb stepped out into the cold, boots crunching against packed snow and gravel. He kept his eyes on the shape close enough now to see fur matted with dirt and blood. It was a German shepherd, collapsed in a heap like the forest itself had spat him out. His flank rose and fell with shallow, uneven breaths. His legs trembled but didn't move. Caleb crouched low. Years of muscle memory kicked in, fast and precise. Hands that had packed wounds in combat moved without hesitation. He tore strips from the old flannel shirt he kept in the cab, used the bottled water in his pack to clean the blood crusted around the dog's neck. A rusted chain had rubbed raw into his skin, embedded so deep it looked fused to the bone. The shepherd didn't growl, didn't fight, just looked at Caleb, not pleading, not fearful, intent. Caleb felt it like a pressure behind the eyes. "You're a mess," he muttered, "but you're not done yet." He reached to unhook the chain. The clasp resisted, then gave way with a metallic crack. The chain fell into the snow with a weighty finality. The dog flinched but didn't move away. And then he did. Slowly, the shepherd shifted, wobbled, staggered to his feet. Caleb moved to brace him, but the dog barked low and guttural and took a step towards the woods. He paused, turned back, barked again. "Whoa! No," Caleb said. "You need a vet. And I need to get home." The dog growled softly, then reached out and tugged Caleb's sleeve with his teeth. Not hard, not frantic, just enough to say, "Follow me." It was ridiculous. Caleb almost said that out loud, but the dog's eyes didn't blink. They were amber, sharp, and alive with something urgent. This wasn't fear. This wasn't survival. This was purpose. He stood, uncertain, then glanced at the dog's injuries again. The chain, the blood, the direction he was going off the road, into trees Caleb hadn't walked since he was a teenager. That path? That wasn't a trail. It was a memory. The shepherd had already limped ahead, pausing, then looking back, waiting. Caleb cursed under his breath, grabbed his pack, slung it over one shoulder. He gave the dog a long look. "Fine, but you better not be leading me to a deer carcass." The dog trotted ahead. The forest closed around them like a secret. Trees pressed in, tall and ancient. Branches creaked overhead. The trail, if it could be called that, was thin and overgrown. Caleb's boots broke through frozen brush. The shepherd, still limping, moved faster now, energized by something unseen. It felt familiar. That rhythm, that buzz behind the ribs when you stepped into the unknown and knew danger might be watching from the shadows. He hadn't felt it since Kandahar. They walked for 20 minutes, then 30. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky into bruised purple. The temperature dropped, but the dog didn't stop. That's when Caleb saw the first mark, an old wooden post, barely standing, wrapped with wire. Faded numbers carved into the side. A property line. His breath caught. This was the old Trager place, except it couldn't be. That house had burned down in 92. The shepherd stopped, tail still, chest rising with quick, determined breaths. Caleb stepped forward and saw it. The cabin, triangular roofline, slanted beams, hidden behind a curtain of pine trees like a structure the forest tried to forget. Except it was intact. The siding was dark wood, streaked with green mold, the windows covered from the inside, the front door chained shut with a padlock the size of his fist. This place shouldn't be here. Caleb whispered. The shepherd growled. Not at Caleb. At the door. He padded forward and sat, staring at the chain. Caleb moved closer, heart thudding. He didn't understand why, but he reached into his pack and pulled out the pry bar he always kept for emergencies. The metal felt colder than it should. He wedged it between the links of the chain. The padlock didn't break immediately, but when it did, it snapped so loud the forest flinched. He dropped the chain to the snow, reached for the door. It creaked open slower than it should have. The hinges cried. The air that spilled out wasn't dusty. It was warm, and it smelled like potatoes. A dining table waited inside, plates still on it. Silverware arranged like a family dinner was just about to begin. The kerosene lamp glowed faint orange. A glass of water sat by the sink. Condensation still rolled down the side. Caleb didn't breathe. The shepherd stepped in first. Sniffed the air. Tail low. Caleb followed, every inch of him screaming that this was wrong. The house wasn't abandoned. It wasn't even empty. Someone had just been here. The shepherd stopped at the far wall, pawed the rug once, then turned, looked Caleb straight in the eye. And for the first time in years, Caleb Ross decorated army vet, lone wolf, man who trusted no one felt something old rise in his chest. The dog hadn't led him here to be rescued. He had led him here to bear witness. And the house? The house had been waiting. The forest didn't just grow denser, it folded in. Branches reached down like they were listening. The air took on that stillness Caleb remembered from nighttime patrols. Too quiet, too focused, like the world was holding its breath. Ranger walked ahead with purpose, favoring one side as he moved. His injury would have hobbled a lesser animal, but this dog pushed on like something in the trees was calling him forward. Caleb tried once to stop him. Ranger. That's far enough. He called. The name had slipped from him naturally, uninvited but fitting. The shepherd didn't turn, just paused, gave a quiet huff, and kept going. The light bled out of the sky quickly. Dusk didn't hang around for goodbyes, this deep in the woods. Snow began to whisper across the trail in thin flurries, stinging Caleb's face. He pulled his jacket tighter and looked back. The road was gone. He should have turned around. But Ranger's urgency made that feel like betrayal. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. The dog wasn't following instinct, he was following memory. That idea rooted itself in Caleb's chest and refused to leave. The path narrowed, hemmed in by brush and frost-stiff branches. Caleb spotted old markings, not recent but man-made. Bits of rope tied to trees. A tin can, rusted through, half buried in snow. It wasn't a public trail, but someone had moved through here before. Many someones. "What the hell is this place?" he muttered. Ranger paused suddenly, one paw lifted in the air. His ears twitched, then went flat. He looked over his shoulder at Caleb, and for a split second, his face didn't look like a dog's. It looked like a warning. Then he moved again, faster. The trees opened suddenly into a clearing, and Caleb stopped cold. An A-frame cabin stood there, its steep roof like a black triangle cutting into the darkening sky. The kind of place you'd expect in a postcard, if that postcard had been buried for 20 years and just clawed its way back. The wood siding was slick with moss. A rusted metal chimney leaned slightly like it had given up holding itself straight. The front door was sealed shut, not by weather, but by choice. A thick iron chain wrapped through the handle, locked tight with an oversized padlock. Ranger growled low, his body tense. He stood still, watching the door, the snow unmoved beneath his paws. Caleb approached slowly. Every part of his military training was screaming. He'd seen buildings like this overseas, outposts repurposed by men who didn't want to be found, cabins that looked dead on the outside but had breath inside the walls. He circled once, staying back. No smoke from the chimney, no lights from the windows. But the snow beside the porch told another story. Tracks, not animal. Boots, recent. He bent low, brushed the snow aside. The prints were deep, wide. Someone heavy, maybe carrying something. "Ranger," he said quietly. "Stay." The shepherd didn't move. His ears twitched, but he remained rooted. Caleb slung off his pack, pulled the pry bar out again. The padlock was old but solid. It would take work. Then Ranger barked, just once, loud enough to shatter the tension. Caleb spun. Nothing. No movement, just the echo of that single bark fading into the woods. "Easy, boy." He turned back to the door, jammed the crowbar into the chain, and leaned into it. The chain groaned. He pushed harder. With a sharp crack, the padlock snapped and fell, bouncing once before disappearing into the snow. The chain unraveled, and Caleb caught it just before it hit the ground, quieting the rattle. Then he opened the door. Warm air hit him. Not hot, not comfortable, but wrong. It shouldn't have been there. The inside of the cabin smelled faintly of wood smoke and boiled something potatoes, maybe. But it was the freshness that cut through him. This place wasn't abandoned. He stepped in. A table sat in the center of the room. Plates were set, silverware placed evenly, like someone was coming back any minute. One plate had half a piece of bread still sitting on it, crust hardened, but not moldy. A lamp burned in the corner, its wick low. He touched it. Warm. So was the cast-iron stove near the back wall. He walked slowly, scanning everything. No dust, no cobwebs. This place had been lived in maybe today. Then his eyes landed on something that made his stomach shift. A woman's scarf draped across the back of a chair. He hadn't seen it at first. It blended in. Faded blue, frayed at one end. Ranger moved into the room now, head low, sniffing every corner. He padded to the wall and stopped in front of a rug. He pawed at it once, then looked at Caleb. His tail didn't wag. His body didn't relax. Caleb approached and crouched. The rug was thick. He pulled it back. A square hatch lay beneath, wood framed into the floor. There were scratches on the handle. Not old ones. Fresh. The kind someone made trying to escape. Ranger growled again, deeper this time, and backed up, his body tight. Caleb stood, heart hammering. He looked around the room again, slower now. Nothing moved. But something lingered, the warmth of breath still in the air, the weight of movement in the walls. He didn't know who lived here, or what they did. But he knew one thing for certain. They hadn't left for long, and they hadn't planned to leave alone. The door whispered closed behind Caleb with a reluctant creak, shutting out the snow and forest and trapping something much heavier inside. He stood just inside the threshold of the cabin, boots planted on worn floorboards that looked recently swept. The room breathed faintly warmth, clung to the walls like perfume. Not the dusty stillness of a forgotten place. This was a space paused mid-step, like whoever had just been here expected to return in minutes. Ranger's claws clicked once as he entered behind Caleb, nose working the air in sharp, controlled bursts. The shepherd didn't bark. He didn't whimper. But something in his stance changed. Alert had turned into unease. Caleb moved carefully past the table. He reached toward the lamp. Still warm. The glass fogged slightly when he breathed near it. He touched the handle of the kettle on the stove, cooling, but not cold. Beside the sink, a glass of water sat half full, condensation curling down its sides. He placed 2 fingers on it. The rim was cool, but not untouched by body heat. Someone had been here. Maybe less than an hour ago. Ranger padded over to the rug near the wall again. He didn't scratch this time. He stood still, tail low, chest rising and falling fast but silent. His eyes fixed on one spot. Caleb followed his gaze. There, pressed flush against the wall, was a large hand-woven rug. Thick, patternless. It didn't match anything else in the room. Caleb knelt, tugged gently at the corner. It lifted easily. Beneath it was a hatch, the kind that didn't belong in a one-room hunting cabin. The wood was newer than the floorboards around it. The handle's simple iron had smudges. Fingerprints, scratches too. Nails. Caleb's jaw tightened, his breath caught in his chest. Ranger took one slow step backward. Not out of fear, more like instinct, the kind born from knowing when a room's energy shifts. Caleb hesitated only a second, then gripped the iron ring and pulled. The hatch opened with a groan, spilling a damp breath of earth and old concrete into the cabin. A set of stairs descended into blackness, steep and narrow. He clicked on his flashlight. "I need you to watch my back," he told Ranger, voice low. The dog didn't blink. He was already at the top of the stairs, facing the darkness. Caleb went down first. The basement swallowed them. It wasn't large. Concrete walls, rough and pitted, soaked in years of damp. The beam of his flashlight swept across them slowly, and then stopped. A map stretched across the far wall, hand-drawn in faded black ink. Trees, trails, the old ranger roads from decades back. Caleb recognized it, not perfectly, but enough. He knew these woods. But it was what covered the map that pulled the breath out of his lungs. Red dots, dozens of them, each one hand-marked, circles, some with X's, all in places just far enough off-trail to be missed by search parties. Caleb moved closer. His fingers hovered over one of the dots, not quite touching it. He knew this story. Years ago, he'd heard it in bars, on base. Old hunters muttering about people gone missing in the Cascades. Hikers who vanished. Campers who never came home. He thought they were legends. Now the dots told a different truth. Each one was placed with intention. Too precise, not random. Ranger whined softly. Caleb turned. The dog had wandered toward a dark corner of the basement. His tail was straight, his ears pricked forward. He pawed at something low on the wall. Caleb followed. It was a small shelf built into the concrete. Dusty, but not abandoned. On it sat a few items, an old flashlight, batteries, and a stack of small, folded notepads. He picked one up and flipped through. Each page had a name, a date, coordinates. No notes, no explanations, just cold, clinical records. Ranger growled. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated through the room. Caleb turned and saw why. Above the shelf, scratched into the concrete, was a sentence. Barely legible in the beam of his light. Only silence leaves no trace. His pulse spiked. He backed up, heart pounding in his ears. Whoever had made this space hadn't done it in a rush. This was maintained, organized, used. He looked back at the red-dotted map, thought of the stories, the missing. He remembered something else, something distant but sharp. A briefing years ago. Base security had mentioned hikers missing not far from the training grounds. Too many for coincidence. Local PD wrote it off as weather. Caleb had believed them. Now he stood in the basement of the lie. Ranger nudged his leg. Caleb looked down. The dog's eyes were fixed on him. Steady. Not afraid. Ready. They went back up the stairs slowly. Caleb shut the hatch behind him, but didn't put the rug back. Some things didn't deserve to be covered anymore. The cabin above was just as still, just as silent. But now that silence hummed with something else. Intent. Caleb walked to the table, sat down in the chair facing the front door. Ranger sat beside him. Snowflakes drifted outside the window, but inside the air didn't move. Whoever had been here was gone, but not far, and not for long. The shepherd had led him to truth. and now the forest was waiting to see what he would do with it. Caleb didn't sleep that night. He sat in the cabin's single wooden chair, the oil lamp burning low, casting soft shadows that refused to settle. Ranger lay at his feet, still and alert, eyes half closed but never fully letting go. The hatch to the basement remained uncovered, open like a wound. Around 3 a.m., Caleb stood up and descended again. The air hit colder now, like the room had inhaled and decided not to breathe back out. The map on the wall hadn't changed, but it felt louder in the silence, those red dots glowing like embers waiting to be stirred. Caleb turned his attention to the rest of the room. The shelf by the wall still held the stack of notepads. He scanned a few more pages. No names he recognized, just numbers, times, coordinates, and something else abbreviations. S/FW/NL/N military shorthand, or something more cryptic. Ranger stood at the top of the stairs, unmoving. "Come," Caleb called softly. The shepherd came down slow, cautious. Not afraid, but there was a tension in his movement. He was listening to something Caleb couldn't hear. The dog moved straight to the far corner of the basement and stopped. His ears pricked. His nose hovered just above the floor. Then, without warning, he barked. A single sharp, echoing bark that made Caleb's skin prickle. "What is it?" he asked, stepping toward him. Ranger scratched at the concrete floor with a sudden frenzy. Claws clicking, paws digging, tail low and stiff. Caleb dropped to one knee and ran his hand over the concrete where the dog had stopped. There. A seam. Barely visible. A hairline crack in the wall that wasn't in the same shape or texture as the rest of the basement. He pressed. It didn't move. He pulled his knife and wedged it into the edge, prying carefully. Dust flaked off. He pressed again, this time harder, and the panel gave way just a few inches. But enough. Behind the false wall was a shallow recess. Not large, maybe the size of a milk crate. Inside was a bundle of cloth. Caleb reached in slowly and pulled it free. It was a woman's coat, once pale grey. Now smeared with dirt, the cuffs stiff with dried blood. One sleeve torn nearly off. He held it up and didn't speak for several long seconds. It was modern, fitted, not old enough to belong to the cabin's rumoured past. Someone had worn this. Recently. His breath fogged in the cold as he searched the pockets. No ID, no phone. Just a button, ripped loose and wrapped in a tissue, stained with something brownish red. He looked back at the recess. There was more. A worn manila envelope, its flap unsealed. Inside, a small stack of Polaroids. Grainy, faded at the edges. But the faces were clear. Always from the shoulders up, always looking directly at the camera. Men, women, a few young. No one smiled. He turned over one of the photos and saw a handwritten date, February 17th. No year. Below the photos, taped together in a plastic bag, was a mini tape recorder, a dusty, outdated model with a red button crusted in grime. Caleb popped it out and checked the battery compartment. Still intact. No corrosion. He hesitated only a moment, then pressed play. Static first, then breathing, then a voice female. Soft, cracked with exhaustion. "I don't know where I am. If anyone ever finds this, please, my name is Marissa. I was on Trail 14, near the Overlook. He said I would get to go home if I cooperated, but—" Silence, then a loud thump, a door slamming. The woman's voice stopped. Click. The tape ended. Caleb stared at the recorder like it had burned him. His heart pounded so hard it sounded like footsteps. He looked at Ranger. The dog was standing perfectly still, ears flat, his body braced like something unseen had just stepped into the room with them. Caleb didn't know how long he stood there. Could have been seconds, could have been minutes. He finally moved, tucked the coat, the tape, and the photos into his backpack. He climbed the stairs without a word and didn't bother to close the hatch. Outside, the wind had picked up, and snow whipped sideways through the trees. Caleb started the truck with shaking hands. They drove straight into town. The sheriff's office sat tucked between a diner and the volunteer firehouse, its windows glowing with amber light. Inside, Sheriff Nolan looked up from behind the desk. Middle-aged, heavy-set, not someone unfamiliar with strange reports. Caleb gave his name and laid everything on the table. He explained the trail, the A-frame cabin, the hatch, the map, the woman's coat, the tape. Nolan listened in silence, nodding occasionally. Then he leaned back, laced his fingers across his stomach, and said one thing Caleb didn't expect. "There's no structure on that land." Caleb blinked. "What?" "It's government-owned. Forest Service. No permits. No buildings in that area. You probably wandered into some old hunting shelter. I just came from it. The stove was still warm. There's electricity from somewhere. There's a goddamn map on the wall with red dots that match missing person reports from the last 5 years. Sheriff Nolan's face shifted slightly, just a flicker, but he recovered fast. "I'll file your report," he said, "but unless you bring me something that ties to an open case, there's not much I can do." Place like that off-grid, unlisted, might have been used years ago. Squatters, preppers, who knows? Caleb leaned forward, voice steady but cold. "There's blood on a woman's coat." A tape with her voice. She says her name, Nolan, stood now, hands on his desk. "You think I'm ignoring you?" "I'm not. I'm telling you the land you described doesn't exist on county maps, and unless you want to go chasing shadows, I suggest you leave it alone." Caleb looked at him for a long time, then stood. He didn't shake the sheriff's hand, didn't offer a goodbye, just walked out. Ranger followed silently. Outside, snow swirled around the truck. The town looked normal. Lights in the diner. Kids across the street throwing snowballs under yellow street lamps. But Caleb knew. Something was wrong in those woods. And that cabin was still waiting. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle as Caleb stepped into McClary's tavern, the kind of place that hadn't changed in 3 decades and didn't plan to. It smelled like old wood, spilled beer, and cigarettes smoked before the ban. The heat inside slapped him across the face, welcome after the long walk through the frozen streets. Ranger padded in behind him, silent but alert, his injured gait barely noticeable now. No one looked twice at the dog. This wasn't the kind of town where you asked questions about a man with a scarred German shepherd by his side. 3 locals nursed drinks at the bar, all hunched over as if waiting for winter to pass. A jukebox in the corner glowed quietly, but no music played. Caleb moved to the far end and took the seat closest to the wall. Behind the counter, the bartender polished a glass with a rag that had clearly seen better days. He looked to be in his late 60s. Wiry, with a shock of white hair and eyes like river stones, smooth and unreadable. "What'll it be?" he asked without glancing up. Caleb reached into his jacket and laid the woman's coat on the bar, folded with care. The bartender stopped mid-polish. His hand froze. He looked down at the coat like it had just started bleeding. The silence stretched. Caleb didn't speak. The man's fingers hovered near the collar, brushing the dried blood gently as if confirming it was real. His eyes shifted from the coat to Caleb, and for the first time he looked directly at him. "Where did you get this?" His voice had dropped. Quieter, but the edge in it was sharp as cut glass. "Cabin out past Alder Creek, about 3 miles off Trail 14, hidden behind pines. A frame. Didn't show up on GPS. The man's face lost what little color it had. No, that's not possible. That place burned down years ago." Caleb didn't blink. "It's standing. Stove's hot. Food on the table. Hatch in the floor." The man closed his eyes for a long moment, then turned and grabbed a bottle from the back shelf. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a glass and downed it in one motion. Then he looked at the coat again. "That belonged to Marissa Langston," he said. "I'd bet my life on it. I saw her wear it in here every Sunday night. Came with her dad after church. Always sat at that table by the jukebox. She ordered hot chocolate. Always tipped in quarters." Caleb leaned in, his voice calm. "What happened to her?" "She vanished last winter," the man said. "She was 19. Went out hiking by herself one afternoon, just a few hours. She knew the trails, grew up in these woods, but she never came back." His fingers gripped the edge of the bar like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "Sheriff's boys searched for weeks. Dogs, drones, helicopters. Found nothing. Then the snow came heavy, covered everything. They said she must have fallen, or froze. But her dad never believed that. Said something wasn't right." He looked at the coat again. "And now you walk in with this." Caleb said nothing. Let the weight of the moment sit. The bartender finally asked, "Did you go down into the floor?" "Yes." "You see the map?" "I saw the map. I saw a wall full of red dots." The old man's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the bottle again, then thought better of it. "My grandfather used to warn us about that side of the forest. Said it wasn't just wild. Said it was wrong. People went missing over there, even when he was a kid. Hunters, campers, sometimes whole families, and every time the story changed just enough to forget. Or they'd say it was the storm, or the terrain, or just bad luck. But he remembered, called it the dead corner. Said there was a house, always the same, steep roof, wood black as coal, showed up, disappeared. Like it breathed, he leaned forward now. No one ever found the house. Not in his time, not in mine. Until now, Caleb took all of this in without reaction. But something inside him tightened. Not fear, not disbelief, recognition. Ranger lifted his head and stared at the bartender, unmoving. "He led me there," Caleb said, nodding to the dog. "Bled out on the roadside. I patched him up, thought I was doing the saving. Turns out he had something else in mind." The bartender's eyes softened for the first time. "He remembers something?" "Feels like it." "You think he belonged to someone who disappeared?" "I think he escaped." Silence fell again, but this time it wasn't empty. It hummed with shared understanding, like both men had arrived at a truth they didn't yet know how to speak aloud. The bartender reached into a drawer below the counter and pulled out a faded manila folder. He set it on the bar and opened it. Inside were clippings, dozens, newspaper articles, printed Reddit threads, local obits with no bodies, even a photo of Marissa smiling beside her father outside a church. She was wearing the coat. He slid the folder to Caleb. "I've been collecting stories for years, never could explain them. Just wanted someone else to see it all in one place." Caleb flipped through slowly. Dates, patterns, all of it pointed toward the same radius of forest, the same blind spot in the system. "Why hasn't anyone done anything?" he asked. "Because," the man said quietly, "most folks don't want to believe evil can build a house and stay that long without anyone noticing." Caleb closed the folder. "I'm going back." The bartender nodded once, no surprise in his eyes. "I figured you would." He turned and pulled something else from the back shelf, an old flare gun. Scratched. Heavy. "Batteries die in those woods. Radios cut out. Cell towers don't reach. If something happens, shoot this straight up." Caleb took it without a word. He looked down at Ranger. The shepherd met his eyes, unwavering. This time, it wasn't just about following the dog. It was about finishing what they had started. The snow had deepened overnight, turning the narrow trail into a white corridor of silence. Caleb's breath clouded the air as he trekked back towards the cabin, the flare gun tucked in his coat, Ranger pacing beside him with a controlled urgency that had nothing to do with the cold. They moved fast. No unnecessary stops. No chatter. Caleb's instincts were locked in now, soldier sharp, honed by the kind of tension that never left you. Not after war, not after what he saw beneath that floor. As they neared the clearing, Ranger froze. Caleb dropped to a crouch, one hand instinctively going to the knife at his belt. Ahead, the cabin loomed like a black tooth in the white landscape. And there it was. Boot prints. Fresh. Deeper than his own from the day before. Wider gait. Heavy. Someone had returned, and recently. Caleb motioned to Ranger. The shepherd obeyed, lowering into a crouch of his own, almost slithering through the brush, ears flat, eyes sharp. No sound came from his steps, just breath. They circled wide, approaching the back of the cabin through the trees. Caleb scanned the windows. No movement. The front door, which he'd left ajar in his last exit, was now shut. The chain was gone, replaced by something else. A rope hastily looped through the handle. Whoever was inside had entered quickly, maybe not expecting company. Caleb crept up to the window and angled himself just enough to see through a thin crack between the curtains. And there they were. A man and a woman. The man moved like a soldier, deliberate, centered, confident. His coat hung open, revealing layered tactical gear beneath. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't afraid. He dragged the woman forward with one hand, her wrists bound, mouth gagged. She stumbled, boots scraping across the wooden floor. Her hair stuck to the side of her face, sweat mixed with blood or tears. Her eyes darted frantically across the room. Caleb's heart climbed into his throat. He couldn't see the man's face clearly yet, just the profile, the squared shoulders, the clipped stride of someone trained. But the familiarity scratched at him like static. He moved to the other window, slower now, trying to get a better angle. Then the man turned. The light from the oil lamp caught his face. Caleb's spine went cold. Malcolm Hart. The name hit him like a punch. Hart, his former CO, the man who had led their unit in Kandahar, the one who'd taken point through the worst ambush of their deployment, a ghost of the war, declared dead 3 years ago after vanishing without a trace during a leave of absence. Rumors swirled, but no proof ever surfaced. Until now, he was right here. And he wasn't just alive, he was running something. Hart shoved the woman into a chair near the table, tied her to it with the same calm precision Caleb remembered from the field, tight, clean, fast. The woman writhed but couldn't speak. Hart stepped back, removed his gloves, and placed them neatly beside a pack he'd dropped by the stove. Then he looked around the room, scanning for signs of disturbance. Caleb ducked low, heart pounding. He'd swept that floor himself. Covered the hatch, but not perfectly. Hart was thorough. He might notice. He glanced down at Ranger. The shepherd hadn't moved. His eyes locked on the door like he was waiting for Caleb's command. But there was something else in them. Something he hadn't seen before. Recognition. A low, guttural sound rolled up from Ranger's chest, just barely audible. He knows him. Caleb mouthed the words but didn't speak them. He backed away from the window, dropped behind the trees, and motioned Ranger to follow. They moved along the edge of the cabin, slow and deliberate, until they reached the narrow cellar access Caleb had spotted yesterday, a storm door nearly hidden under snow and brush. He cleared it fast and quiet. Opened it. The air that hit him from the basement was still damp, still cold, still heavy with the secrets Hart had left behind. Caleb slipped in and closed the storm door behind him. The basement smelled sharper now, stale and metallic. He moved toward the false panel Ranger had uncovered, opened it again, and scanned the contents. Everything was still there. The photos. the envelope, the tapes. But now, something new sat on top. A folded map, larger, more detailed, and one red dot circled with black ink. Today's date scrawled beside it. He looked down. That dot was directly on the cabin. The woman upstairs wasn't a ghost of the past. She was next. Suddenly above him, floorboards creaked. A chair scraped. Then the unmistakable voice of Hart, calm and measured. "You won't be missed, you know." Caleb froze. The voice hadn't changed. It was the same voice that once barked orders across sand-blasted bases. The same voice that steadied frightened rookies through ambushes. That same voice was now cold, intimate, terrifying. Caleb slipped the new map into his coat, heart hammering. Then a sound stopped him dead. A second pair of footsteps. He turned. Ranger was already at the stairs, growling low, body tensed. Someone else was upstairs. Caleb's hand went to his flare gun. He had one shot, one chance to bring fire to the darkness. But first, he had to get that girl out alive. And Hart, his old commanding officer, his ghost from the war, had to be dealt with face to face. This was no longer about discovery. It was about reckoning. The floor above creaked. Caleb stood motionless in the dark, back pressed to the damp concrete wall of the basement. Ranger crouched beside him, low to the ground, body rigid. The faint, muffled voice of Hart still floated down through the cracks in the floorboards. It wasn't rushed. He was calm, confident, like someone following a plan that had worked 100 times before. But Hart wasn't alone. Caleb had heard it boots. A second set of footsteps, heavier, slower. Ranger had caught it first, ears flicking the second the weight shifted above them. Caleb glanced at the shepherd now. The dog's breath was quiet, nose twitching toward the far end of the basement where the shadows were thickest. Something was down there, something more than a map and a hatch. Caleb moved quietly, flashlight low and dim. He scanned the back wall again, looking for irregularities, anything that didn't match the basement's original design. And there it was, a faint seam in the concrete, just above the floor out of line with the cinder blocks. Barely visible, but not natural. He pressed his fingers into the edge. It moved. A soft hiss of stale air rushed out. Caleb slipped through the narrow opening. Ranger followed, silent as fog. Inside, the temperature dropped. The walls here weren't finished raw cement, some damp, others cracked. Shelves lined all 3 sides of the room. But they weren't filled with tools or supplies. They were filled with artifacts. Wallets, watches, necklaces, driver's licenses, scratched-up phones, folded clothing, each item tagged with a small piece of masking tape and a handwritten name. It wasn't storage. It was a ledger, a shrine. Above the shelves, pinned to the walls with pushpins and yellowed tape, were photos. Not family snapshots, not portraits. These were taken under fluorescent lighting, all posed the same. Shoulders squared. Faces tight with fear. Eyes wide. Frozen moments of resignation. Dozens of them. Caleb stepped closer. Some faces were young, teens, barely old enough to drive. Others were adults, hardened by time or life. A few matched the missing persons bulletins he'd seen in the bartender's folder. They weren't ghosts. They were evidence. The center of the room held a small table with spiral-bound notebooks stacked neatly beside cassette tapes, each labeled with numbers and initials. He picked one up and ran a thumb over the label. Subject 11A, confession pending. Another read, Langston. Emotional breakdown, no extraction. Marissa. He opened the top notebook. The handwriting was neat. Cold, clinical. Entry 3/14. Subject F23. Acquisition Trail 14, 1400 hours. Resistance, minimal observation. Compliant, first 36 hours. Behavior shift noted day 4. He stopped reading. He didn't need more. Ranger growled behind him, low, throat deep. Caleb turned, saw the shepherd's gaze fixed on the door they'd entered through. Footsteps. Not upstairs, here. He shut off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed the room. 2 sets of boots descended the main stairs. No talking. Just the kind of movement that came with purpose and familiarity. Then the creak of the false wall swinging wider. A flashlight beam cut across the shelves. Caleb crouched behind the center table. Ranger ducked beside him, body coiled like a spring. The first man stepped into the room. Tall, shaved head, heavy tactical jacket. The kind of bulk that came with strength, not speed. His flashlight scanned the shelves, landed on the table, paused. "Boss says pack it up." The man muttered. "Too much noise. He'll torch it after extraction." A second man followed. Younger, lean, rifle slung loose across his chest. His eyes flicked across the photos like they meant nothing. "What about the tapes?" he asked. "Leave them. They don't matter anymore." They both turned, and that was the mistake. Caleb lunged. He slammed into the younger one first, driving his shoulder into the man's ribcage and sending him crashing into the shelves. Tapes and folders spilled to the ground. The older man swung around too slow. Ranger launched. The shepherd collided with the man mid-turn, jaws clamping onto his arm with a crunch of bone. The flashlight dropped, beam scattering wildly across the wall of photographs. The younger man scrambled for his rifle, but Caleb was already on him. He drove a knee into the man's gut, then grabbed the strap of the weapon and yanked. The gun clattered to the ground. The man swung a fist, clipped Caleb's cheek. The blow stung, but not enough. Caleb brought his elbow down on the man's shoulder, then slammed him back into the shelf. Ranger snarled, holding tight to the older man's arm, dragging him to one knee. Blood pooled quickly on the cement. The man screamed, tried to shake him off. Couldn't. Caleb kicked the rifle across the room, then grabbed a length of paracord from his pocket. He flipped the younger man face down and bound his wrists before he could resist again. The guy bucked, but not for long. Caleb pressed a boot into the center of his back and finished the knot. He turned to Ranger. "Off!" The command was sharp. Ranger released instantly, teeth dripping red. The older man sagged, clutching his arm. Caleb tied him too, fast and brutal. Then the room was quiet again. He stood, chest heaving, his face burned, his knuckles throbbed. One of the shelves lay collapsed, tapes scattered across the floor, but the evidence was still here. All of it. And now, so was the truth. Ranger sat at his side, panting, ears tilted forward, blood still flecked on his fur. But his eyes were clear, focused, the kind of eyes that remembered. Caleb looked around one more time, at the photographs, the names, the silent testimony of the shelves, and he realized they weren't done yet. This wasn't survival. This was justice, and it had just begun. Ranger's growl started low, more vibration than sound. Caleb didn't need to look. He could feel the shift in the shepherd's body beside him. The dog had gone still, not frozen, but taut, waiting. It was the sound. Heavy boots, not on the stairs this time, coming from the far side of the cabin above them. Someone had circled around. Heart. Caleb tightened the paracord on the second assailant's wrists. The man groaned, still half-conscious. His partner lay slumped beside the broken shelves, clutching the shredded sleeve where Ranger had torn through muscle. The girl. Caleb turned toward the darkened corner of the basement, where the woman mid-20s, duct tape still across her mouth, sat curled behind a stack of storage bins. Her eyes locked with his. She didn't move, didn't even flinch. She'd heard everything. He knelt fast, cutting the bindings at her wrists, then the tape over her mouth. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "He said you'd die down here too." "We'll see about that," Caleb said, pulling her gently to her feet. "Can you walk?" She nodded. Then a voice echoed down from above. "Caleb." The sound stopped him cold. He hadn't heard that voice in 6 years. "Didn't think I'd find you here." Not this soon. Malcolm Hart's voice was exactly as Caleb remembered. Measured, confident, like a man giving a mission briefing on sacred ground. "I was going to burn it all tonight," Hart continued, footsteps creaking above them. "Guess it's poetic you came crawling back first." Caleb motioned the girl to the side. He scanned the basement, eyeing the backup exit hatch he'd spotted earlier. It was across the room, past the shelving. Ranger tensed again. And then everything happened at once. A door above burst open. Caleb heard the impact before he saw it. Boot on the top stair, wood splintering, then a heavy thud. A third man, not one of the earlier attackers, charged down, rifle drawn. Caleb pushed the girl behind him. "Down!" Ranger moved first. He didn't wait for a command. The German Shepherd exploded forward, launching off the ground like a shot from a cannon. The man raised his weapon too slow. Ranger's full weight slammed into his chest, jaws locking on the firing arm with a crunch that echoed off the concrete. The man screamed, weapon clattering away. Blood sprayed across the cement floor. Caleb was already moving, closing the distance, grabbing the rifle before the man could reach it again. He flipped the weapon, butt first, and cracked it into the man's temple. The body slumped to the ground. Ranger backed up, panting, front paw lifted, bleeding. Caleb knelt. The cut ran along Ranger's flank, too. Shallow but angry. A graze, probably from a ricochet or broken shelf edge. The shepherd licked Caleb's hand, unbothered by the pain. "You good?" Caleb asked. Ranger stared back, steady. He was always good when it mattered. Gunfire erupted upstairs, automatic, not random, controlled bursts. Caleb's eyes met the girl's. "He's not alone?" She shook her head. "He never is." Caleb looked toward the hatch again. No time for subtle. He handed the girl the rifle. "Ever shoot one?" "No." "Point and pull if you have to." "Don't think, just move." He grabbed the closest flashlight, clicked it off, then tossed it across the room. It skittered under the far shelf. Caleb counted. 3 seconds. He pulled the hatch lever. Rust screamed. A sliver of cold night air hit his face. Freedom. He turned. But Hart was already at the top of the stairs, pistol in hand, calm as ever. The firelight behind him made his shadow stretch long over the basement wall. "Caleb," he said, smiling. "Still trying to save people?" He raised the pistol. A shot rang out. It missed by inches, slamming into the beam beside Caleb's head. He grabbed the girl's arm. "Move!" They bolted for the hatch. Ranger turned last, lips pulled back, eyes never leaving Hart as he backed away, blood dripping in a trail behind him. Another shot, another miss. Caleb shoved the girl up first, pushing her through the narrow opening. She scrambled out into the snow. "Go!" he yelled. Ranger leapt next, landing with a grunt but upright. Caleb pulled himself up last, boots slipping on ice. A third shot cracked through the air, grazing his shoulder. Pain bloomed hot. But he didn't stop. Hart followed. The man was faster than he looked, already halfway up the stairs. Ranger spun in the snow, barking, hackles raised. The girl helped yank Caleb out just in time, her hands cold but strong. They ran. The forest swallowed them again. Branches snapped behind them, voices shouting. Hart was coming. Not with stealth anymore, but with rage. Caleb didn't look back. He couldn't. But Ranger did. Always watching, always guarding. The fury of a dog who had seen too much and still chose to protect. Hunter's fury, and it wasn't done yet. The wind bit hard across the clearing, whipping Caleb's blood-stained shirt against his side as he shouldered Ranger and the girl between two pines. The forest was waking, but not with birdsong, only the distant echo of sirens still too far to matter. Caleb dropped to one knee and pulled the flare from his pack. It had been taped to the inside panel for weeks. If things went wrong, if he couldn't get to a radio, or the cell tower stayed down, it was the only signal the outside world might see. He looked at Ranger. The shepherd was bleeding through his bandage again, but steady. He hadn't taken his eyes off the tree line once since they'd escaped the cabin. One ear twitched every time a branch cracked. He was reading the wind, the silence, the shift of threat like a second language. Caleb stood, twisted the cap of the flare, and yanked. It burst with a raw, violent pink light screaming upward, a trail of fire splitting the grey morning sky. For a second, time paused. The girl beside him, her name was Lindsay, he'd finally learned, whispered, "Now we wait." Caleb didn't answer. They wouldn't have to wait long. It took 6 minutes, long enough for Ranger to track something behind them. Caleb saw the dog lift his muzzle, teeth bared, but not barking, just a low, guttural growl that meant one thing. Someone was coming. Caleb raised the rifle they'd taken, eyes locked on the underbrush. And then Hart stumbled into the clearing, disarmed, disheveled, with blood soaking through one pant leg. His eyes were wild. He lunged, not for them, for Lindsay. She froze. Caleb fired. Not to kill, just enough to snap Hart sideways. The bullet hit the dirt inches from his foot, and Hart spun instinctively. That hesitation gave Ranger all the time he needed. The shepherd launched again, not with the fury of the basement, but with surgical precision. His weight hit Hart's center mass, knocking the man flat. This time, he didn't go for the arm or shoulder. He stood on Hart's chest, unmoving, growling low, guarding, holding him still without a single bite. Hart understood immediately. "You trained him too well," he gasped. "No," Caleb said, stepping forward with zip cuffs. "He trained himself." Within 10 minutes, the sound of rotor blades echoed through the trees. Then came the sirens. The old ranger road wasn't far. Lights flickered through the pines. 2 deputies arrived, first rifles drawn, tense, but they dropped their stance when they saw Hart on the ground, Ranger poised above him, and Caleb holding a badge, a torn shirt, and a 1,000-yard stare that screamed he wasn't bluffing. Sheriff Duncan came next. The man stepped out of his SUV slower than Caleb remembered. Not out of caution, out of shame. His eyes scanned the flare trail still fading in the sky, then dropped to Hart lying in the dirt, wrists bound, face swollen. "What the hell?" Duncan muttered. Caleb tossed the duffel toward him. Photos, IDS, half-burned files. There's more inside the crawlspace under the cabin hidden room, behind the furnace. Duncan hesitated. Then he opened the duffel. He didn't speak again for nearly 2 minutes. Just flipped through the photographs. Marissa's jacket, a piece of bone, a burned driver's license, one after another. Ranger stood beside Caleb, finally lowering into a sit, panting slightly but alert. "He kept them all," Caleb said. "Like trophies." Duncan turned pale. "You were right." Caleb didn't gloat, just looked him in the eye. "You could have stopped this years ago." The sheriff didn't argue. By the time the forensic van pulled in, word was already spreading on the deputies' radios. The missing girl, the hidden basement, the flare, the dog, everyone wanted the story. Ranger limped toward Lindsay, who was wrapped in a thermal blanket now, sipping water. She reached out, hesitantly at first, then scratched behind his ear. He closed his eyes, leaning into the touch. The local news van showed up just as Hart was loaded into the cruiser. His face turned toward Caleb as the door shut. "This isn't over," he said. Caleb looked back without flinching. "It is for you." The reporter tried to rush Caleb next, mic in hand, ready with the usual questions. But Caleb raised a hand, stopping her cold. "Talk to the dog," he said. "He saw more than I did." The woman blinked, hesitated, then, to her credit, knelt in front of Ranger. He sniffed her notebook once, then turned away, curling up at Caleb's feet. Not barking, just resting. Because the flare had been seen, the evidence was no longer in shadows. And for once, the forest listened back. Caleb sat down on the cold earth beside Ranger, eyes locked on the tree line. The sirens faded, the air settled, and above them, the sky held a trail of smoke that hadn't yet disappeared. It meant someone came home. The clinic sat quietly on the edge of town, nestled between a feed store and a shuttered diner with peeling signs. Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and old coffee. Ranger lay curled on a thick blanket in the corner, his right flank shaved and stitched tight, the gauze fresh. He hadn't moved much the first 2 days. Pain meds kept him still, and the vet said the muscle damage would slow him for a while. But by the 3rd day, Ranger had forced himself to his feet, wobbly, stubborn, determined. Caleb watched every step like a father watching a child take their first. He hadn't left the clinic either, slept in the truck, ate from vending machines. He could have gone home, but that didn't feel right, not until Ranger could go with him. On the 5th morning, the vet, a former Navy medic with tired eyes and a soft spot for K9s, gave a small nod. "He's ready." Caleb didn't speak, just knelt beside the shepherd and ran a hand gently down his neck. Ranger nudged him, a soft press of his head into Caleb's chest. The drive up to the cabin was slow. The road hadn't gotten any better, but the woods welcomed them back. Fall was setting in, leaves gold and crimson, wind whispering low through the trees. Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat, bandage still wrapped, eyes sharp. His ears perked when they passed the old ranger tower. He knew the territory now. He owned it. The cabin appeared around the last bend, just as Caleb remembered it, rough-cut, stubborn, alone. Smoke curled from the chimney. He'd had a neighbor prep it while he was gone. Someone owed him a favor. But one thing had changed. A wooden plaque hung from 2 iron chains above the front steps. Carved by hand, not perfect. He didn't bark for food. He barked for the truth. Ranger sat on the porch, the sun warming his fur. The scars would stay. But they didn't define him. If anything, they made him look more like what he was, a survivor who chose to protect rather than run. That night, Caleb lit a fire inside and made stew from scratch. Ranger got his own bull venison and rice. No table scraps, nothing cheap. Only real food for a real soldier. Later, the wind picked up. Ranger shifted in his sleep, growled once, then settled again. Caleb stepped outside, hoodie pulled tight, and stared at the stars. Somewhere out there, people were reading headlines, watching shaky cell phone footage of a flare in the sky and a dog guarding a predator like a sentinel of justice. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was here. A man and his dog, quiet in the aftermath of noise. There would be more battles ahead. Always were. But for now, they had peace. He glanced back at Ranger, half asleep, half alert. "You never asked for glory," Caleb whispered. "You just kept telling the truth." The wind answered with a sigh through the pines. And on the doorframe, next to the carving, Caleb scratched a final question into the wood, just below the plaque. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" Then he looked into the camera. Because they were filming this, part of a small project Lindsay had suggested. A way to preserve the real stories, the ones people don't always believe. A story not about a hero in uniform, but about the one with paws. And to the viewers, those who'd followed the journey through darkness, fire, and truth, he spoke one last time. If this story moved you, or reminded you of the dog who stood by your side when the world didn't, then share it. Subscribe. And tell us your story below a long pause. Because sometimes the ones who never speak bark the loudest when it matters. The screen faded to black. And in the background, you could still hear the soft breath of a German shepherd sleeping by the fire. For more true stories that honor the bravery, loyalty, and soul of dogs like Ranger, subscribe to our channel This is German Shepherd, where loyalty has a voice. What's your story with a loyal pet?